So Lag BaOmer, what happened just this? Okay, so this time, any requests for refuah or dedications for anybody?
No, not that I could think of. Just Klal Israel.
Go man, all close. Okay, so Lag BaOmer. So and on the 33rd day of the Omer, which will be tomorrow night, it's the day that's it's celebrated. It's the 33rd day. It's actually the anniversary Yotzar of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. It's not when all the 20,000 followers or 22,000 followers of Rabbi Akiva, the plague stopped. It only stopped at it stopped before Sukkot, I think, Damon, or did it stop? They stopped. The plague actually ceased. Actually, only on I think it could have been now. Let's see. So basically, it's the 33rd day of the Omer, so Shimon Bar Yochai's Yortzeit, and that's why people go to a place called Meron in north of Israel, and they like a few 100,000. And some people keep the Sphira from the first part, from the second night of Pesach, like myself and others, and you can go back to normal, having joy, experiencing more joyous things from tomorrow night, or probably even better from midday on Tuesday. But it's celebrated with bonfires and singing and all festivities, and people can have simchas, like weddings are often held on that day. And what else does it say? Yeah. So I'm just trying to see when the plague when the people stop dying. Doesn't say anything. It's basically the anniversary of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's passing. That's the Yortzeit. That's the main thing I can see here. There's nothing.
Well, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a student of Rabbi Akiva's, and when he taught under Roman rule, you remember him and his son, they had to escape, and initially their first place of escape, they were found out, and then they had to get and live by a cave.
Cave, that's right, yeah.
And they basically lived obviously off water and a carob tree. It was miraculous, and it was very difficult under Roman rule, because his son, remember, was Rav Elazar. Remember, his son was one of the Tanaim. So yeah, okay. So let's guys, let's start the share, the actual share. Okay, so Arthur somewhere there, as long as he's there, that's fine. So Arthur, are you there?
He's excited. You're not going to deter him from what he's doing there, Damon.
Yeah, no, but I just want him to be present.
Okay. No, he's there. He's there. He went into the room.
All right. So the question arose, according to Gavin's question, is that wood has many purposes. So the Gemara brings up this as a question, and the Gemara says, look, at the end of the day, if you're questioning the exclusion of all woods on the grounds that their benefit is derived after their consumption, basically because our primary category is one of cooking, and to allow the wood to become coal embers, cooled down sufficiently and create an even heat, and then you cook and then you eat. At the end of the day, that's one use. But what happens when you're dealing with oily wood? In other words, wood that has like a sapin, or maybe wood that naturally exudes some sort of oily substance, where it can be used for two things. A, for flammage in order to cook. But the second thing of it is not all wood is flammable. And you would use that sort of flammable wood specifically if you wanted to light a torch. And therefore, the benefit there would coincide with its consumption, just like eating. So if the benefit would coincide with the consumption, as a torchlight, then it should be subject to Shemitah sanctity. So they asked Rava, what, as far as that's concerned, what's this story? And he said, look, even if you look at oily wood in and of itself, in general, it stands to be used for fueling a fire and not as a torchlight. Okay. So in other words, wood of the types used for fuel, according to Rashi, was given to man primarily for fueling fires, not for lighting. In other words, the primary use of fire and wood was in order to cook, not for lighting. And as we discussed last night, there were a myriad of reasons. There are sources in Bereshit. One of the reasons is that in the beginning of mankind, light was reserved, eventually the divine light for tzaddikim, but there was a certain luminescence in the world at the time of Adam Arishon, etc., where you didn't need light from a torch in order to keep a place sufficiently seen. That's number one. And always the primordial mentioning of a particular source governs the principles found later. Okay? But in any event, the main benefit for survival is one of cooking, not for light. One of heat is obviously a bit more of a deeper question, but as we said, in the time of Nisan or Tishrei, according to the two different opinions when Adam was created and did the first sin, these were not extremely hot or cold months. And therefore, whether it's the northern or southern hemisphere, it's either autumn or spring. Therefore, it wasn't winter where you needed that sort of heat to keep you sustained. So therefore, since the usage in general, common usage is for cooking, and the benefit comes after the consumption, even oily wood doesn't become subject to Shemitah sanctity. So even if one collects oily wood specifically for lighting, according to Rava, it's not subject to Shemitah sanctity because its non-sanctified status was already determined at the time it grew on the basis of its common usage, not the individual that picked it up and happened to use it for lighting. It's common usage, and that's found in the 40th daf of Sukkah. As far as the aftergrowths of safflower and woad, they're generally used for dyeing, and there the benefit is derived as it's consumed. Let me just wait for Gavin.
Sorry, I've just got Willie here as well, so it's a bit difficult. I'm trying to do my best. Okay, carry on.
Gav, where did I leave you?
2 seconds ago. Just go back. You talk about fire, and then it wasn't used for warmth.
So Rava is saying.
You said warmth is a tricky issue. All right.
I said it is a tricky issue, but it's not really, because at the time when we're given the rules, all the rules are generally set up in Bereshit, or at the first time that's mentioned as a source. That's your prototypical application. So therefore, if you say Adam was created in Tishrei, or the world was created in Tishrei, or it was created in Nisan, according to the other opinion, they're either autumn or spring, depending if you're in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, they switch around. But they're not the height of winter. And therefore, the heat aspect of the wood wouldn't be primarily to keep you alive, because you don't need it. Nor do you need the light, because there was primordial light. That was later reserved for the tzaddikim when we became unworthy. So the common usage was cooking. And therefore, that's known, according to Rava, as the common use. So even if an individual picked it in order to use it as a torch, he's the exception rather than the rule, and therefore it doesn't contain Shemitah sanctity. Whereas with dyes, on the other hand, seeds were planted in the 6th year and you use the aftergrowths, so for example, woad and safflower, the benefit is derived as it's consumed, because as the dye gets melted away in the cauldron, it's absorbed in the clothing, and therefore it's like eating. So therefore it gets Shemitah sanctity. And the problem is, if you're dyeing the clothing, then you're getting long-term benefit, and you have to get rid of it by the time of removal. So then you have to burn the garment. So then you either have to find a special product in the field where it doesn't supersede the Shemitah sanctity, meaning if you find certain plants that are used for dye, and it lasts as perennial plants within the field, because irrespective of weather conditions, it grows without man's constant tendering to it, or the giving it either soil nutrition or the correct sort of climate. Then even if it attains a certain amount of sprinter sanctity, because it's growing in the 7th year, because of seeds you plant in the 6th, there's no bi'ur removal, because, Gavin, the bi'ur removal only has to do with if you're in a timeline where it's no longer in the fields because the animals ate it, or the climate doesn't sustain it. So something can have Shemitah sanctity because dyestuffs do animal food and human food, but your timeline of bi'ur is only when it's no longer available in the field, because your intervention of putting it in the storage means you're getting benefit during Shemitah. But if you didn't get involved with the nurturing of it during the 7th year, and it's there anyway, and the environment sustaining it, that Shemitah sanctity, even though it's growing in the 7th year and therefore has Shemitah sanctity, doesn't render it unfit on a timeline. You get what I'm saying? So, if you're looking at cane leaves and grape leaves, they get Shemitah sanctity. They get Shemitah sanctity according to their application. Why? Because if you're using cane leaves or grape leaves to feed your animal for animal fodder, it's food, it's animal food, and therefore the consumption and the benefit are intertwined, and then it becomes subject to Shemitah sanctity, and therefore you have to get rid of it by the time it's no longer available in the field, and you can't keep it going with storage. If you're using, on the other hand, the cane leaves and the grape leaves for kindling a fire, at which the benefit is going to come after consumption, it never attains Shemitah sanctity, and therefore you can keep it in storage after the time that it's no longer available in the field, because the benefit and consumption are not on the same timeline. Okay? So that's one of the things that you've got to bear in mind. Okay. Now, one other factor that the Gemara actually brings is we're saying that this isn't such a clear case. That might be Rabba's opinion. But this is actually an earlier Tanaic dispute, because Rav Kahana said, whether we say that oily wood gathered for use as a torch has no Shemitah sanctity. Why, guys? Because the wood in general stands to be used for fueling a fire. And therefore, if the odd person uses it as a torch, it doesn't infect it with a different rule for Shemitah sanctity. That's a Tanaic dispute. Okay, because it was taught in a brisa, you cannot hand over Shemitah produce for use in a soaking pool of flax, nor for use in a laundering pool. But Rav Yossi says one may place Shemitah produce in a soaking pool or in a laundering pool. Okay, so you've got the opinion of the rabbis that say you can't hand over Shemitah produce for use in a soaking pool of flax, nor in a laundering pool. Rav Yossi said you may. So let's just see what we're talking about here. Now, the first thing is, according to one opinion, guys, since wood is generally used for fueling a fire, wood is never subject to Shemitah sanctity because the consumption occurs before the benefit. And even oily wood in general is used for that. So if it's occasionally used for a torch, it's not the common usage. According to another opinion with other Tanoim, wood is not necessarily free of Shemitah sanctity. Why? Because if oily wood was used to keep a torch lit and the benefit and consumption occurred simultaneously, in other words, the benefit of the light while the wood was being consumed by the flame, it would attain Shemitah sanctity if gathered for use as a torch. That's according to Rashi. So in other words, the essence of the dispute contains Rabba's assertion that Shemitah sanctity depends on the gatherer's intent only when a plant is commonly used for two purposes, as in the case, guys, of cane and grape leaves, right? But where a plant is used primarily for one purpose, Like, for example, just for wood, the Shemitah's sanctity will be determined by the general common use, even if the gatherer picked it for another use. So Rav Kahana is basically demonstrating that one Tanaic opinion says that the gatherer's intent can always affect the Shemitah classification of the plant, even when that plant is generally used for a different purpose. Okay, guys, can you tell it back to me so I know you are following?
No ways I can today. I've been working non-stop, but there's no ways. I'm destroyed. I'm just trying to follow you, like, basically. Kevin, you want to give it a shot? I'm finished.
Okay.
I'm hearing you, but there's no ways I'm not following you 100%.
Maybe Arthur can.
Kind of following. Arthur looks nice and fit today. Arthur?
Hey, what do you guys want to know about this thing here? Look, I'm emotionally worn out today. I don't know why, but I'm emotionally worn out.
Yeah, that was my fault.
About the Shemitah sanctity, Damon.
Arthur, do you know the
Okay,
answer?
so I'm kind of got the idea with the wood. That I just got one question. What does Shemitah sanctity mean? Does it mean it's good or is it bad for Shemitah?
Okay, so all Shemitah
That's the
sanctity
question.
means, it's an excellent question. I think Arthur's asking a good question. It sounds like a bad thing. On the other hand, it sounds like a holy thing. So what is it? So, Arthur, anything grown in the 7th year we can't use because we have to, in Eretz Yisrael, allow the land to lie fallow, because basically the land is entitled to a Sabbath. And it's a high form of emunah to know Hashem will still look after you and give you food, even if you let the land rest for a year. So
Yeah, well said, Damon.
anything that's grown in the 7th year, you can't use. It's Shabbat. You can't pick and gather and plant on Shabbat, neither can you in the whole of the 7th year in Eretz Israel. So what we, that definitely, that Shemitah sanctity is forbidden for, you can't plant in the 7th year and derive benefit. What we are talking about here is what happens if somebody drops seeds in the 6th year and there's an aftergrowth which sprouted in the 7th year. Can you enjoy it? And the reality is, you certainly can, but it has certain restrictions. One of those restrictions is it cannot have intervention, human intervention, to carry on living, which means if a person has to tend to it, it's as if they're working on the 7th year. So if it's a perennial plant that can withstand an Israeli winter or an Israeli summer, then by all means use it. If it's going to die in one of those seasons, you can use it up until the time that it dies. And your question would be, well, how could I use it if it dies? Well, it's a good question, which would be a common question. And the answer is, when it's in that happy growing season, people then cut it up and put it in their storerooms in order to save it for winter so that they can use it and when they see fit. In other words, nobody goes out in the snow in order to chop trees to build for firewood, because at the end of the day, that person would freeze to death. So what happens is, as it's coming autumn, I mean, I used to watch these shows on DSB, Below Ground Zero, Alaska, Fighting Alaska, you know, that sort of drill, like how people deal with the elements. And generally before winter came, that's when they would do provisionary storage. So what we're saying is here is it's fine, you can store it and you can use it. But when it's no longer available in the field because either all the animals ate it or the environment is too harsh and it doesn't sustain it, at that point you can't get continual benefit just because you cut it beforehand and put it in a storehouse. Because it's as if you had intervention on the ground, because it's only because of your intervention that it's still existing. It's as if you've harvested it and gotten benefit or continue to water a plant. It would have died along with everything else had you not put it into storage. So that's considered a manipulation in the 7th year, and therefore you can't touch it past that point of removal bi'ur when it's no longer in the environment. So it's not all good or bad. It's just there's a timeline in terms of status. But the pasuk said in Leviticus that you have to, that produce that you're getting benefit from eating. So it's not just stuff that you're eating. It's stuff that mimics eating in terms of consumption and benefit coinciding. So in other words, if it's an activity where you're destroying it as you're eating it and you you have to destroy it at a certain point and you're getting benefit, that's cool. But if you're destroying it, but your benefit comes later, then you can use it. Why? Because it doesn't have Shemitah sanctity then. Because if the benefit is derived after you destroy it, then it doesn't attain Shemitah sanctity at all. It doesn't attain any sort of...
So let's see. Shemitah sanctity means you can't use it on Shemitah, and non-Shemitah sanctity means you can use it on Shemitah.
No. Shemitah sanctity means you can use it during the Shemitah year because you haven't planted it in the 7th year. You planted it in the 6th year. Anything in the 7th year you can't.
Okay.
Yeah. But...
That's what I wanted to know.
Correct. But Shemitah sanctity means you're on borrowed time. Meaning if it doesn't... yeah, you're on borrowed time.
And now I understand what you're saying. Okay, so let me see if I've got this. It means if you did something in the 6th, you planted a certain thing in the 6th, and in the 7th it was naturally and always there. Okay, it's got Shemitah sanctity until, let's say, it was a winter plant and summer came and it died. Once summer comes, you can't use that plant even if it's in storage.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. And vice versa. Okay, now I understand what Shemitah says. I don't know what it says. I mean, I heard Shemitah sanctity, I'm going, it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. I don't understand it. Now I do.
No, it's just...
It sounds opposite to what it actually is.
Yeah, it does.
You think that's the part that's protected from being affected by...
It's good until the season expires. That doesn't appear naturally. That's basically the nutshell.
Okay, what
So you can
Damon, so there is something with fruit, because I have to... This is practical, especially for all of us. Let's say if you're in Israel now, Damon knows about this. If you pick fruits that was great, that bloomed and was ready for consumption in the Shemitah, that was planted in the 6th year. You can't just eat it and throw the peels away, or the parts that you don't consume. You can eat them, but you have to put them in a bag and you have to wait till they rot. Then you dispose of them. So there are exceptions also, because it's got a certain sanctity. But there are exceptions, and the rabbis Rav Kook.
Not right away.
So you can't, because you can. So as long as it was planted in the 6th year, but it may only bloom in the 7th year. In the Shemitah year, you're not allowed to. Some people don't take fruit off trees, but you can. But you have to treat them with a bit more sensitivity. You can't just throw the stuff in the garbage, the peels and the leftovers. You have to wait till they rot a bit or ferment, so they're not inedible, and then you can dispose of them. But it's also, so the Shemitah is quite important.
Yeah, it has
there are ways and means.
Significance today. So just Arthur, doesn't it take... Yeah.
So basically, what I'm realizing here is Shemitah is a 7th year. It's like Shabbos. You got to show the world that this Shemitah year is different to any other year.
Exactly.
That's exactly it.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And
it's like a giant Shabbos.
It's a giant Shabbos, and what happens is, if it either grows throughout the year, you can use it during the Shemitah year because it doesn't have human intervention. It's like if your money's in the bank and it earns interest over Shabbos, but there's nothing you did manipulatively to cause that, it's fine. And also, if the benefit occurs after the consumption, then that's fine. Let me give you a perfect business example. You do a transaction on a Shabbos, okay, and a non-Jewish client pays you on a Saturday. Sorry, I mean, you do it on a Thursday. You negotiate a deal, and for some reason you haven't told him to pay on a Saturday. He can pay the whole of next week or whatever. It's not like you go to the mechanic on a Friday afternoon and say, I want my car first thing Monday morning, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And you know he's not open on a Sunday and he's only open on a Saturday. You're not playing games with God. But this is a case where you had an arrangement with the client on Thursday and say, listen, we're doing your training or supplying you with goods or services in 2 weeks. Just sometime during the week, if you can please make proof of payment or deposit or whatever the case may be. So in that particular case, we'll make proof of payment. He pays it on a Saturday. Now, you earned the money on a Saturday, but you don't have to give the money back on a Saturday because he did it of his own volition. I don't know what the halach is with a Jew, but with a non-Jew, you wouldn't have to give that money back because you never transacted business on a Saturday. So it can be compared, Arthur, to a plant that you plant in the 6th year, and that carries on growing in Shabbos, on Shabbos in the Shemitah year. And then so fine, get benefit. You didn't intervene. You didn't intervene at all. It's not a problem. At the point where it dies, you can't have human manipulation to keep it into storage to keep it going. But if you know the plant's going to die, but you know that you're using it where the benefit occurs only after consumption, you can still use it. So the question is, why can you use it if the plant's going to die naturally? Because then the second rule of Shemitah sanctity, of whether something does get Shemitah sanctity. Now, this is whether it does or doesn't. Before we said it does have Shemitah sanctity, but you can't use it where it's no longer available in the environment. But if the benefit occurs after consumption, like you're burning a fire and you can only cook ages later when it doesn't even resemble wood anymore, then it never acquires Shemitah sanctity in the first place, Arthur, because in order to attain Shemitah sanctity, it has to follow in line with the pasuk in Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 25, verse 6, which basically says, in a nutshell, the Sabbath produce of the land shall be yours to eat. So therefore, what is to eat? It means that the benefit coincides with the consumption or destruction. And when you burn wood and cook ages later, it doesn't have anything to do with this that pasuk resembling eating in terms of the benefit and consumption alignment, and therefore it never attains Shemitah sanctity at all. Not at all. So therefore you can store it even if it's not available in the environment and still use it after, because it never got Shemitah sanctity. But you can't plant it in the 7th year. You had to have planted it before.
And then can I ask you another question as well? I'm sure you covered it. I can't remember what you said. This is purely for your own. So if you plant in the anything that's got Shemitah sanctity can't be sold, correct? It's only for your own personal consumption, correct?
Yes. Why can't it be sold? There's 2 reasons we went through.
Well, because it's directly in the Torah. The verse says it, doesn't it? That's for personal consumption, doesn't it say that?
So, okay, so Gavin's onto a good point in terms of one of the reasons. One of the reasons is you can use it for your animals, for yourself, for dye stuffs, which implies not as a commercial business. So it's like Shabbos, is that it's got that sort of sanctity that implies, as Rashi said, not for business. On its literal translation, it means not for commercial endeavors, for your own benefit or for your animal's benefit. Do you get what I'm saying? So that is absolutely correct, Gavin. The second reason is that the problem conceptually with business is that it perpetuates the benefit past the time of bi'ur where you have to get rid of it. Because what you've done is it's like taking it and converting it. Shemitah transfers the sanctity from the object to when you sell it to the money. And therefore you perpetuate the benefit, because way past the time when the plant would have died, where you had it into storage, you're reaping the benefits of something growing during the Shemitah year, when it's no longer in the environment, due to the animals consuming it, when the environment being hostile, exactly as Arthur said. So at that point, that money becomes subject to Shemitah sanctity, and you've got to get rid of the money. If you think you're going to play another game and buy something with the money, the object you bought the money with, the Shemitah sanctity carries on, and you've got to get rid of the object. It's the permanence of business that is prevented in the Shemitah year. What were you going to ask?
Benefits. It's like you're not allowed to get benefit by selling it.
No. You're not allowed to get continual benefit. So in other words, that's the whole problem with the dart stuff. Because with the dart stuff, it said how we got on this whole subject is a dye something significant? And we said if you dyed with all our fruit, where you can't use it for the first 3 years, you can't get benefit, you're burning the garment. If you're dyeing something with Shemitah produce, a dye is permanent, you're getting a benefit long after the time where that aftergrowth wouldn't exist in the field. And then you're getting permanent benefit of the appearance on the clothing, and then you have to get rid of the clothing and burn it. So that's the problem, is you're getting benefit beyond the period at which you're allowed to get benefit. That's all.
Yeah, extending it, because you're putting it into something that doesn't...
whether it's money or permanence, or exactly as Gavin said.
Because that's got permanence. It doesn't self-destruct or whatever.
So what we're talking about...
Decompose.
Correct. Now what we're talking about is a different issue. There's an issue with Rava, and the issue with Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana is basically saying this issue of the wood, this issue of the wood is a Tanaic dispute. Because on the one hand, you've got the opinion that says whatever the person's intent was when they gather determines the Shemitah sanctity. So if the consumption and the benefit match, where you lighting the wood and it's burning and consuming the wood while you're using it as a torch, the wood attains Shemitah sanctity, and you cannot use it at the time where that wood's no longer available in the field. If, however, you're cooking with it, and then the benefit is going to occur long after the consumption, it never attains Shemitah sanctity, that wood, even oily wood, because that was not the gatherer's intention. The other opinion, and this is the opinion of Rava, for the other Tanaim, is turning around and saying, look, there's nothing to do with the gatherer's intent, it has to do with the common usage. So if 90% of people use even oily woods and normal woods for cooking as its base principle, then even if the gatherer's intent was to use it as a torch, it never attains Shemitah sanctity where the consumption simultaneously occurs at the same time as the benefit, because most people get the benefit after the consumption and therefore it never attains Shemitah sanctity in the first place. So the one is it the gatherer's intent, or does it have to do with the common usage? Because when you say it's about the common usage, it was grown having it in mind about what the majority of people do. So therefore the Shemitah sanctity rule or regulation occurred at the point of growth. The fact that the gatherer picked it for another use had already been determined beforehand. So, and according to other opinions, it has to do with the intent of the gatherer. And we're not talking about a question, and this is very important to know, we're not talking about a question where it's only used for one thing. So if you grow grapes for human consumption, in that particular case, if you grow grapes for Kiddush or whatever, you can't use it for a mundane activity because this halachic status is already on the grapes. The only time Rava says that you've actually got a choice is when there's more than one application for common use. So with cane reeds or grape leaves, you can either use it as animal fodder to feed your animals, or you can use it as wood to cook food. If you're using it as animal fodder, the consumption and the benefit match. As the animal's eating, that product's being destroyed, so it resembles eating in the pasuk, and then it's subject to Shemitah sanctity. So if you use those products and you put it into storage, you have to get rid of it at the time it's no longer available in the field. If you've gathered the cane leaves or the grape leaves, the cane reeds or the grape leaves, then if you're using it for firewood, you can keep it in storage even if it's past the period of being available in the field, because it never attains Shemitah sanctity, because the benefit is derived after consumption. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's only in a case where the application could go both ways in terms of either simultaneous benefit and consumption versus delayed benefit and consumption is their question. But according to Rava, when it's a case where it's determined quite clearly what the common status is, there's nothing to talk about. And this is the issue that's going to come across with Rav Yossi and the rabbis, where obviously the one opinion is basically quite clear that gatherer's intent is everything, and the other opinion is that common usage is everything. All right, guys. I think we've got, how long have we got? We've got 4 minutes. Let me just cover what I can in 4 minutes, less to do. So it says there's a Tanaic dispute that reminds us of this. You can't hand over Shemitah produce for the use of soaking a pool of flax, nor for in a laundering pool. But Rav Yossi says one may place the Shemitah produce in a soaking pool or in a laundering pool. So if the Gemara analyzes the basis of the dispute in order to demonstrate that earlier statement, that basically the status of oily woods is that's the subject, meaning oily woods you would commonly think are used for lighting a fire, and benefit and consumption are simultaneous. then why would there be a question? Well, the reason of the rabbis is the verse is basically saying it shall be for you to eat, but not for other applications. In other words, anything other than eating, it's a problem. But Rav Yossi says, no, it's not about the concept of for eating, it's about the concept of fulfilling your needs. So we're going to go through that next time. And then is there consensus if it's similar to eating as opposed to actual eating, etc.? But what they basically used to do is they had a procedure called retting. So retting was if you're trying to make linen out of flax, like cotton or whatever, you've got to soak the flax stalks to loosen their fibers. And that's called retting. And it takes a certain amount of alcohol in order to let the chemical process take hold. But it can take days for that chemical effect to occur, which means it might never attain Shemitah sanctity if the benefit is only achieved ages afterwards, which means it doesn't resemble eating, which means there might be a problem according to the rabbis or Rav Yossi. So that's what we got to see, is if delayed benefit is makes any difference. The one thing for sure, though, is that you cannot, and this is important, you cannot add Shemitah wines in a pool in which flax is soaked or when clothes are laundered as a part of the cleansing process, because that, according to Rashi, constitutes business, meaning it's a generic term for all non-permitted uses of Shemitah produce. And for Gavin's particular example is that it's a commercial endeavor to soften fabric or launder stuff. And you say, well, what if I'm laundering my own stuff? The whole purpose of it is to eat it and consume it, not to basically have it as non-permitted use. So it has to mimic eating. And how do we mimic eating? Is that the benefit and the consumption coincide together. But if the chemical process only occurs afterwards, does it in fact ever get Shemitah sanctity because the benefit is delayed? Or in fact, even if it does get Shemitah sanctity, are you allowed to use it for non-regulated use? Because as soon as the flax or laundry is placed in the wine to soak, then the wine, you can't use it for human consumption. It's unfit because chemically it's destroyed. And then 3 or 4 days later, when there's retting and the chemical working is done, you can't drink that wine afterwards. So for sure, there's a problem, because are you even allowed to use sanctity for mundane or business purposes? All right, guys, I hope this cleared things a little bit. We'll tackle this on Tuesday. Have a good luck.
My focus got in afterwards. I was a lot better afterwards. I was battling at the beginning. All right, thank you. Well done. Thanks, Damon. I actually got to the end.